we just may want to come in for a family viewing, and then we're going to close the casket because we don't want anybody to see how much weight they've lost or how bad they look. And I always took those as my own personal Everest to be like, oh, you wait until you come in and you see how good, and I know people always joke and they say, oh, people standing over a casket saying, oh, well, she looks so good. She doesn't look good. She's dead. Well, no. I mean, if you do your job right, she can look good.
Yeah. Welcome to Creepalachia. I am so happy to welcome inside the studio inside knowledge of the funeral system. I don't know if you call it that, but anyways, we have Sally Ratcliff here, who was a funeral director for nearly 20 years. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm oddly excited for this conversation because I have so many questions, and it's going to take a turn later into golf.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. So we'll get into that later, but go ahead and start with some background about you and how you originally came about getting into the industry.
Okay. I Shady Spring graduate, I'll give a shout out. I had always thought I would go into science somehow or into medicine. I thought for a while orthopedic surgery. I just all this, and then you get toward graduation and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm not sure. And I had an uncle that was a funeral director and embalmer. And then he kind of moved up into corporate funeral industry, into management. And he said, oh, go embalm bodies. You'll love it. That'll kind of get your science aspect that
Makes
you like
sense.
there. And so I thought, oh, okay, I'll try. So I was like 19 and I applied and started working in a local funeral home, doing all the cruddy jobs, that the ones they give you at first, like go clean the prep room after they're done or go, do all the things like that, working viewings, working funerals. In West Virginia, you can serve your apprenticeship for mortuary science prior to going to school. So you have to have like a year mortuary school, 2 years regular college, a year mortuary school, and then a year's apprenticeship. But in West Virginia, you can serve your apprenticeship first, or after, either way. Some states don't let you do that. So I wanted to serve mine first because I wanted to make sure before I dropped the dime on tuition, this was really what I wanted to do. Because when I got to mortuary school, there were people that had never stepped foot in a funeral home and decided they wanted to do this. And those people usually didn't make it through the whole way. But so by doing my apprenticeship first, by the time I went to mortuary school, I had been involved in hundreds of embalmings and funeral services and kind of knew my way around, the funeral part of it. So I went to mortuary school in Cincinnati. And then after I finished school, I went South Carolina for a year, ended up back here where I started. And so overall, a 20-year career in the funeral home and cemetery.
Wow. So do they do like a thing of like, I always heard from people like, well, if you get through the embalming, let's do that first and then we'll talk about you doing the rest of it. Do they make you do certain things when you go to mortuary school to be able to be qualified?
You do. And it's changed quite a bit now. When I went, you went to the school. Basically, the two schools that people go, that people name are in Pittsburgh or Cincinnati. And Gupton James is down in Georgia, but you went to the school and did everything there. You had labs there. Now I think a lot of it you can do online, and then you go for like a few weeks of clinicals. But when I was there, like it was a very intense, year of chemistry, business, like psychology courses, sociology courses, all sorts of different things. But then we did have the embalming lab there and did all that. Of course, like I said, I'd seen what I thought was a lot by the time that I went to mortuary school. Turns out I have never been so glad to get back from mortuary school and see like old people that died of natural causes after a long, wonderful life. And, because in mortuary school, they basically embalmed, like all the funeral homes sent us the cases that they didn't want to deal with because the mortuary school do them for free.
Right. What does that mean? Didn't want to deal with?
Well, like trauma cases, burn victims, drowned victims, infectious. We got a lot of AIDS cases because why even risk a needle stick with somebody that has a disease that you don't want when you can just send it to mortuary school?
Send it to the amateurs. Let them
send it to the amateurs and let them figure it out. So we had a lot of trauma cases, homicides, suicides. In the spring, the mighty Ohio, when the temperature changes and the water does something weird and turns, a lot of drowning victims come to the top. And so we had a lot of like missing persons. I'll tell you something cool.
Well, because they bloat?
Well, and I don't even know the science behind it. I just know like because of the temperature change, either the cold water comes to the top or the warm water comes to the top. And so we would just have this influx of drownings or people that had been murdered and thrown in the river or just a lot of crazy things. Wow. Something I thought of because we were talking about, crazy stories and some gore. Mm-hmm. When someone has been in the water a long time, a lot of the layers of skin, they just get saturated. And the craziest thing, the detective came there because it was like a missing persons they were trying to identify. And he slipped the skin off their fingers, just like gloves.
Oh, wow.
And put them on his own and fingerprinted them. And I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that submissible in court?
I guess he felt like he could get a better print because then the skin would be full.
Right.
You know how your fingers get wrinkly in the water? Mm-hmm. Well, this kind of filled it out once his finger was in it. And I thought that's the craziest thing I've
And
ever
if you
seen.
cut yourself deep, you realize like the outer epidermis, I'm going to make up words. I think that's the word.
That is the word.
Okay. It's thicker than you think it would be.
Right.
So that makes sense that
But it kind of then detaches from the underlayers of skin.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
Yeah. So we saw a lot of crazy things in mortuary school.
Yeah. So let's start with, one more question about the education. Sure. So, is it essentially like a bachelor's degree, or does it work the same as a college does?
I have my associates in mortuary science. Cincinnati offered a bachelor program that you could go an extra quarter or extra semester for, but it wasn't required. So like I did 2 years at Concord and then finished with my associates in mortuary science there. Okay.
So is it like A, B, C, D, or is it like satisfactory, unsatisfactory?
No, it was good. I mean, I graduated valedictorian in my class.
Good for you.
Thanks. Yeah. But I also felt like I went in with a huge advantage because I had seen things that other people at this point have only read about. Mm-hmm. Because some states don't let you do that apprenticeship prior to going to school. So then you come back, you take your state boards. I did so well on my national boards. I thought I don't have to study for my state boards and almost failed them.
Oh, wow.
So that was a mistake. But no, it's now I'm rambling, so you can cut that part.
No,
right
we don't have to cut that. You're doing so good. So, how old can you be in West Virginia before you do an apprenticeship for someone listening out there? Because I've heard like there's a lot of family run funeral homes where the kids, become teenagers and then they're kind of like, all right, time to get, in the funeral home
Right.
and they start doing things, is there any kind of
Like
legalities
generational.
there?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I don't want to answer
That's
that
the best
wrong.
answer. Yeah.
Right. Check with the State Board of Funeral Director Examiners, and they will be able to tell you.
I would imagine it'd be working age.
Yeah.
I mean,
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have to be 18
sure.
to do your apprenticeship. But there are younger people than that, as long as you can work, that, do attendant type jobs. And like I said, work viewings and clean bathrooms. And
you can
and that
embalm
sort of thing.
bodies, but you can't drink beer.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. All right. So do you remember the first dead body you saw? Or is it kind of a vivid memory, or have they all kind of melted together? And
I don't know if I remember the first one I saw, like in a casket, but I recall one of the first that I don't even think I helped embalm, but helped with was moving her from a gurney to a table. And just, they said, okay, she had a sheet underneath her. We're going to get the sheet, pick her up, move her. They said, you get the sheet under her head. So when we lifted, all the air expelled out of her lungs, and we got this, and I was out the door. I was like, I don't think they're supposed to make that noise. And, it's like, freaked me out. But then you kind of get used to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you have to get a little desensitized to it. And I always kind of felt like, we'd go at all hours of the night and make removals when someone would pass away, or if we'd have to, especially if someone passed away at home, we went right then. So, everyone would say, is it creepy being in the funeral home at night? And I always thought, I am much more scared of the living than I am of the dead.
Right? Yeah.
Because they really can't do anything. So
that's like cemeteries. I just find it really peaceful to walk around, and it's like people are listening, but not in a weird way. I don't know. It just feels calming to me. Maybe that's odd, but that makes total sense because, the person there can't, drunk drive into your family, or can't, do something crazy. So that makes sense. Did you remember when you picked up that body of like, well, this is a lot heavier than I thought it'd be? Or was it kind of...
I don't think in that particular instance, I was gone so fast down the hallway that I don't remember that. We've kind of learned, like I learned how to lift and move and pull. I think when, I was still a teenager when I started working, and they were concerned that the little girl couldn't, she's not gonna be able to lift and move and do. And of course, I'm determined to prove that won't make a difference. It's probably why I have such bad back now. But you learn how to lift and move and maneuver.
Sure.
I mean, I always felt like I could by myself move and like dress by myself somebody that weighed up to about 300 pounds. Over that, then you would need some help. But like I could, wiggle and move and do things that it wasn't a problem.
Yeah. Well, so you started out with a kind of a chip on your shoulder of like, you know what? I'm going to show y'all. I'm going to do this.
A little bit. Yeah. And I quickly then also learned that was dumb and I really just need to ask for help.
Yeah.
I probably should have learned that sooner. But my manager at the time told me, they said, you are coming into an industry that is very conservative. You're going to be going into churches that won't appreciate you walking in pants, like when you do church funerals. You're going to be directing pallbearers, and they are all going to want to look right over your head because you're a little girl. And I thought, well, but I did take that into account that like I had to be, more assertive in some ways and, dress more conservatively or do things, to respect the fact that that's just the industry that we're in.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because, originally I started this, I was like, I want to know what the embalming process is, which we'll get into. But so they did... especially being, is conservative because it's West Virginia, or the industry as a whole? Because I feel like obviously we hold funerals in the high regard, and people's emotions are going to be real heavy, and they're going to be wanting the utmost respect. I mean, obviously, which they should get. So they kind of walked through of like, okay, well, here's what you do. You don't talk here. You wear this kind of clothing. You do, that
somewhat,
kind of thing.
And right. And I was trained by funeral directors that had been in the business a long time, and we're, like, we're older men. And they said, I'll tell you right now, like, you're not going to fit in with this group, and you're going to have to make yourself do that. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to find ways that, to integrate yourself in, or they'll just look right over top of you.
Yeah.
So
that makes total sense. All right. So, day one of It's Time Sally Learns Embalming. Walk me through the process here. And you can talk a little bit about what you didn't realize, but main thing is like a body arrives at the funeral home. And we can get into how that happens in different ways. I'm curious if you work with a coroner, or what's the difference between, let me ask that first. What's the difference between a potential crime and then someone who passes away of old age? Is there a difference, or
a little bit? Especially if it's an unattended death. So, if someone, like, mom's been sick, mom's under a doctor's care, mom passes away at home, we know that Dr. So-and-so is going to sign the death certificate. We just go pick mom up and bring her back to the funeral home. As long as we have a signing doctor, we're okay with that. If someone says, I went to check on mom and she had passed away and she'd been there and we don't know exactly what happened, that's a little different. Especially if mom hadn't been sick.
Mm-hmm.
So then a lot of times then that would include possibly law enforcement, definitely the medical examiner, just to check things out and make sure that, that she did in fact, unfortunately, just have an event and pass away. So, I know it was funny one time when I was driving, I had gone to West Virginia University. I was driving back from Ruby Memorial with a deceased, and they only release from there certain times so that you don't have hearses coming in and out all day.
Sure.
So they wouldn't release until midnight. So it was like 3:00. I'm driving back through Summersville and get pulled over for speeding.
Oh,
and
90% of the audience has been there. So
yeah, exactly. If you've been through Summersville, you understand.
Yeah.
And of course, I wasn't in a hearse. I was just in a removal van that's kind of made to put gurneys in the back, but it just looks like a standard van. And so it was a female officer, and she comes up to the window, and I said, just want to let you know I'm transporting a deceased. What do you mean? And I said, well, I work for a funeral home. And I think she was under the impression that they brought them to us, like that the coroner or someone would deliver them to the funeral home. Like, it just totally blew her mind that I had a body in a bag in the back. Now, if I had a thought, I'd have slapped gloves on real quick and been like, she has a communicable disease. And
oh, nice.
And been like, do you really want my license? And start handing her things. But that I thought of that after.
And you were in a hearse?
No, I was just in a van.
Oh, in a van. Okay, I missed that.
And so it was totally confused and still wrote me a ticket.
Gotcha.
But anyway.
So y'all don't take hearses to pick up the body?
Typically, we did if it was someone at home, just out of respect.
Okay.
But if in a hospital or a facility setting, we would use a removal van.
Got it. All right. So, embalming. Take me step one. Body. You get that body to the funeral home. What happens next?
And let me say, Sally put a lot of socks on dead folks before I got to the point that, like, you didn't just walk in day one and right into the thick of it. But when I did start, so if let's just say I went and picked the person up from wherever, would put them on the embalming table, go ahead and undress or ungown, take off any, bandages. Sometimes they would still have IVs or things like that from medical treatment, and just kind of prepare them. That was kind of the first step. Position them, put a block under their head. You kind of want them in the position that they're going to be in for the casket. When rigor mortis sets in, then also when you embalm, they get more firm. And so whatever position they're in when you embalm, that's kind of how they're going to be.
Oh, wow. So explain rigor mortis for the audience, the people who may not know what that is.
Okay. So at first, like within the first 24 hours, I guess, it's been a long time. So since I've looked at the textbook.
Sally's retired from the funeral business.
So don't hold any of this against me if I give like the wrong, but no. So anyway, it's just the muscles get more rigid. But then after another period of time, so like that kind of sets in, but then it goes away. Like the muscles start breaking down to the point then that rigor mortis goes away. But typically within 24 to 72 hours, that's kind of a thing. And sometimes, we work and kind of bend and kind of work that out to get people positioned how we would want them.
Sure. So you get them in position first. So when they,
so that when because now the embalming, basically the process of embalming is it serves the purpose of disinfecting the body. It also fixes the proteins in the body, which slows decomposition dramatically. But when it does that, then the body becomes more rigid. Mm-hmm. So you do want it in the position how you would want in the casket. We had a child, and rather than just laid how you would imagine someone in the casket, they wanted him laid on her side with his hands folded up under. And that would have to be something you would have to know first.
Yeah.
Before you did the embalming.
How sad. And do you put clothes on before you position, or?
That's kind of the last thing. So the embalming, once they're positioned, it's really it's kind of a clean surgical process. I've had so many people come to me with misconceptions. I mean, somebody said, is there like a meat cooler? Like, do you put them on hooks? I'm like, oh my God. It's just what?
Goodness.
No. And that's one of the reasons I think it's important to talk about this kind of stuff is because there are a lot of misconceptions. But no, it's a very clean, it's like being in an operating room. You make an incision right along the clavicle, and then you can raise both the carotid artery and the jugular vein right there.
What do you mean by raise? Like,
so once you make the incision, you've kind of got to go through a layer of muscle and some fascia, and then you get put a hook under it and kind of pull it up so you can actually work with those vessels.
The vein,
and the artery.
Okay, got it. Now, I imagine there's blood at this point, or does it vary on the condition?
Well, a lot of it varies on the condition, and that has so much to do with how someone turns out. Is how long past their time of death are you doing the embalming? I never like to embalm bodies warm. To me, that just seemed a little too soon. But a lot of embalmers do. They're like, the sooner the better. Mm-hmm. I still always had great results a little further out. But so you raise that artery, you insert a tube that is connected to your machine with the embalming fluid. And then you also snip the vein and open it up with forceps so that when you turn the machine on with the embalming fluid, it's pushing fluid into the artery through your circulatory system, and that's forcing the blood out.
Where does it go out at?
So it'll drain from the jugular vein, if that's your point. Now, you can do other points like femoral, and, like if the neck was damaged, you can do other points. But just on a typical case, you go right in through the neck. And so the blood drains out the vein, down the table, and down the drain into the...
Oh, so it goes on the table and there's a funnel?
It has like sloped sides that it drains down a channel and then a tube into the sink at the bottom.
And then where does the drainage go? Do you like have to, hazardous waste or anything like that? Where does it go?
Down.
It just goes in the earth?
No, it goes into the plumbing. It goes in into the basic water system. And then so when it dilutes down and they treat all the water and everything, it's fine. You're fine.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it goes in the septic system.
Yeah.
Wow. Which I guess makes sense because feces is large part blood. So, okay.
Right.
This is so interesting.
Now, if we had blood-soaked materials and things, now that would go in biohazard waste. Mm-hmm. If they had a bandage that was really bloody and things like that, needles, all that goes in biohazard waste. But just the actual liquid blood just goes down the drain. Okay.
What about a murder victim? Is it the same thing, or they gather their evidence before the body gets there, I imagine?
Those would go to the coroner and be a medical examiner case. So we would pick those up from Charleston. And they typically, if it's a full autopsy, they have a Y incision, from shoulder to sternum and then down past their navel. Mm-hmm. They also have, usually from one ear to the other in the back, is cut, and then the top of the skull cut off so that they can take the brain and examine the brain.
Okay, so they have a process of how they do an autopsy, right, which makes total sense. And they have a little chart. Which
drastically changes then how you have to embalm. Because, I told you up here, we're going in one point and it's just flushing everything through and the blood out. And when you start getting embalming fluid out, it's run all the channels and all the vessels. When there's been an autopsy and everything's cut, all the circulation's cut. So you have to do each arm, each leg, both sides of the head individually.
Yeah.
So it changes it a little.
And I have another question. I don't want to be morbid. I imagine you have dark humor to get through this profession, but this isn't humorous. I'm just generally curious if someone has a heavily clotted heart, or is there roadblocks that sometimes hit where it swells up or anything like that, or does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that they do to embalming fluid basically as a tracer is it's bubblegum pink. It's bright pink. Switch one, then you can see it. If I see someone's hand starting to take fluid, it's getting pinker, which is great because it gives them a little natural color. Mm-hmm. But it also works as a tracer for your fluid. So,
is that why it's pink, for color purposes?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
For Caucasians, except then you have to watch persons of color. Mm-hmm. You don't want them to have that bright pink undertone because it looks unnatural.
Wow. So there's different kinds and colors. Wow. That's so interesting. All right, so it hits a bad intersection,
right?
Around the leg or something. Do you massage it out so it'll keep running?
You are massaging the whole time to try to get, because the pump is pumping it into the big vessels. Massaging it really helps it out into the capillaries, getting it into the small vessels and getting good fluid distribution. If you see that an arm or a leg or something, you may have a bad clot or sclerotic arteries or whatever that, lots of different medical conditions you realize that leg's not doing anything. And you may have to then go in that particular point and shoot fluid down that leg or in an arm, or sometimes one side of the face won't do as well. And so, especially, if it's the face, obviously that's the part everybody's going to be looking at. So you want to take, really good care to make sure that the color's even and that sort of thing. So you may have to go in the other side and then just put fluid directly up. So yeah, anytime that there were, I loved little, cases that just went standard. You had 1 point injection. It take about an hour. And then I've had cases that have taken hours upon hours upon hours because, the body just was not taking fluid well.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So let's get into some, I don't know, for lack of a better word, tips and tricks. So you do the embalming process. Are there any certain tricks that come to mind of like, oh, well, this person has, had a heart attack. Maybe they're a certain color that like is very hard to get them looking. Is the goal to make them look like they're asleep essentially? Or is the goal different with each?
Something weird, a little weird. You can usually tell when someone's had a heart attack because they have a very ashen gray color. It was just a real standard. So, the goal to me was to always, I would hear a lot of, we just may want to come in for a family viewing and then we're going to close the casket because we don't want anybody to see how much weight they've lost or how bad they look. And I always took those as my own personal Everest to be like, oh, you wait until you come in and you see how good, and I know people always joke and they say, oh, people standing over a casket saying, oh, well, she looks so good. She doesn't look good. She's dead. Well, no, I mean, if you do your job right, she can look good.
Yeah.
And that was always my goal because typically the family hasn't seen her with her hair done or makeup on or in anything besides a hospital gown or, just give me a chance. Give me a chance to work some magic. When someone has lost a tremendous amount of weight, we have silicone tissue builder that you can go with like a hypodermic syringe. And so like if their face is real sunken and they just look gaunt, you can puff them back up a little and add, just fill them up a little bit where they've lost so much weight. And I would always take pride when I had families that had said, we'll come in and look for private viewing, but we want it closed. And they come in and look and they're like, we're just going to leave the casket open the whole time.
Has anyone ever broke down crying when you?
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Probably all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, and I will tell you, one of the things that shaped me dramatically, and it was before I went to mortuary school, I had, my first cousin was killed in a car accident. And our family was just devastated. And I was working at the funeral home at that time. And the family had used another funeral home in the area. And I just remember being so upset thinking, I can't do this job because I don't even know what to say to my own family that will make this any better. So how in the world am I supposed to deal with people I don't even know? Like how am I supposed to help? And my manager sat down and he said, the thing is, there aren't any magic words. There's really nothing you could say. And if there was, they're so upset, they probably wouldn't hear them anyway. But the reason we do what we do is, we go the extra step. Like, we don't cut clothing down the back and just drape it on them because that's not how we wear our clothes. We take the time to wash the blood off their backs, clean out from under their fingernails, do things that I guarantee no one will probably ever notice. But that you did absolutely everything for that person and for that family to let them have a respectful, dignified moment of closure. And I think the closure part is so important. Like, that's what just really sells me on funeral. You know, a lot of people, I don't care, just throw me in the river. You really won't know the difference if we throw you in the river or we have a funeral. But funerals are for the living. You know, that's so that families can come and have that time and have that closure. Like, I remember when my cousin was killed, it seemed so unbelievable to us that that was even true. And I remember my mom saying, because at one point they thought about having a closed casket with him because of injuries. And she said, if I don't see him, I'll never believe that this actually happened. So that was kind of the situation that I really held with me through that 20 years was, how would I want my family treated? Like, how would I want, if that situation happened all over again, you know, and I was the funeral director taking care of the family at that point, how would I treat my own family? And that really is how I try to treat every single family I ever met with. You know, every person I ever embalmed, you know, we can talk. And yes, there's a tremendous amount of dark humor.
Sure.
But at the same time, I don't want to come across as disrespectful, because, you know, one of the signs that hung in the embalming room at the last funeral home that I was said, everyone is someone's child, parent, sibling, spouse, or friend, and you treat them with the respect that they deserve. And I really did try to do that, you know, and take care of families. Like, I mean, when my grandfather passed away, I went and picked him up, brought him back, and embalmed him. And somebody said, how do you, and I'm like, well, I wouldn't want anybody else to do it. Like, I want to be the one that, you know, that's the last thing I could do for him. And I really do feel like I try to treat every single case with that same respect.
That's beautiful. What about, like, have you ever had a case where you knew that this person, let's just say, was a bad person, like that murdered somebody, or did you know backstory on these people, or did you try to not really dive into that?
Sometimes the embalming would happen before we met with the family. And then sometimes we'd meet with the family. And then, like, if someone was at the medical examiner, it may be a day or two. So we already then knew, like, I already knew the backstory and the situation going in. And then sometimes not. And sometimes then you hear the backstory and you're like, wow, but as far as treatment, that really didn't matter.
Sure.
Because again, it's still somebody's son or spouse, or, you know, or whatever. So in that regard, it didn't change anything. It didn't change the process.
You kept it emotionally professional. I don't know, like a very thoughtful approach to remaining professional. And you couldn't, like, what are you going to do? Like, oh, well, I'm not going to embalm him fully because he's a jerk.
I'm only giving him half the fluid.
Yeah.
No.
All right, I do have another question, and respectfully, but you get someone that comes in that's on the bit of the larger side, which we tend to be in West Virginia, and we love those people too, and everyone's fantastic. But is there anything that comes to mind to you about that specifically, on how you handle that, or a protocol?
You know, there's a lot of logistical issues. I mean, it just becomes a point, you know, embalming. There were times that I would have someone like that would be morbidly obese, and I would have to stand on a milk crate just because they were so high up off the table. Even if I lowered the table, I still had to, you know, the work that I had to do all of a sudden was up much higher.
Sure.
The other thing, because I worked at a funeral home that had a crematorium, with cremations, when we would get up over about 500 pounds, 500 plus, one thing that would happen is the crematory gets very, very hot because there's less room for air to circulate around the deceased. Also, fat renders down. And so when you have a crematorium, there's like a tray at the bottom, and that's what you rake the ashes into. My job when I first started, like the lower tier, this is going to be your job to deal with, was I would have to sit and watch the temperature on the crematorium to make sure that it didn't get up too high. And also, sometimes the fat would render down and it would run out where the door for the tray was. And because it was so hot, it would set the floor tiles on fire. So I had to sit there with a fire extinguisher and make sure that the floor didn't catch on fire if any of the grease ran out of the crematory.
What? Who knew this was a thing?
It's a thing.
Wow. How big are these ovens?
I don't know the exact dimensions, but
but you can fit. 500 pounds. That's a large.
Yeah,
that's a larger.
But so like you would typically put someone in a casket sized container,
right?
But then if you had someone that was so much bigger, usually we would have to like make a container and then we still, try to be respectful and do that. But again, logistically, sometimes weight could really, cause some issues. And
and you would have a fire extinguisher there anyway, but
right.
You'd just be like, did you know it was going to happen or did
Not
you?
Not really, but
okay.
Like if the grease started rolling out, then it would it would set the floor on fire.
Wow. That's crazy. Not crazy. What's the word?
Yeah.
It's just so
that
far.
one there really is no word for.
Yeah. It's like, what did you do today, honey?
Like you don't even want to know.
Yeah.
There were so many of my days that I was like, you are just not going to believe what happened to me today. My mom always told me, she's like, you need to be writing this stuff down. And I really wish that I had, because now I feel like I've forgotten so much of it. I probably breathe too much formaldehyde. Like, that one's gone.
Yeah. Oh, man. You talk about that'd be an amazing book and helpful.
The other part that we haven't talked about is like after you do the arterial work, the intestines and the like thoracic cavity and abdominal cavity don't always get... Like you're kind of getting that fluid out into the limbs and in the main vessels, but all the organs don't necessarily get that. And you can't really massage that and do all that. There's one chamber of your heart that doesn't drain, different things like that. So we take a trocar, which is a spear on suction, kind of like you've seen liposuction, except it's bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And you, like right beside the belly button, you insert the trocar into their abdomen and you try to hit like all the organs. You want to puncture the lungs, and you're trying to make holes for one thing, because after you do the suction, then you put fluid back, like embalming fluid back in. So you want a bunch of channels that all can soak. Your intestines have so much bacteria that you want to slow down the decomposition there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the second half of that embalming process.
So there's no guts in the body. Like you pretty much remove.
Well, you don't really remove them as much as you just poke holes in them and try to suction out any fluid.
Gotcha. Okay, so you try to dry them up, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, because it is very dehydrating.
Okay.
So, and kind of back to what we were talking about,
Sure.
of like I didn't like stab them extra hard or anything like that.
You just gently doink.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're pretty sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you get the gut stabbing. I don't know what else to say. Is that a technical term? And like you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned respectful, because I'm going through that right now with the channel, because we talk about a lot of murders and a lot of different things. Now, the only people I throw shade at are murderers, but at the same time, a lot of these people are someone's son, daughter, sister, brother, and I try to figure out how to respect that too, while I put the victims in higher regard, if that makes sense. So it's not really relative when it comes to the burial process, but I relate a lot to that, and it's nice to know that that you all really have a thoughtful approach with everybody. So, all right, so you do that. then do you start like, is there a way, like, do you clean their nails? Do you like?
We do. So after all the injection of the fluid and then you treat the cavity, then they get a good bath. Just scrub top to bottom. Like I said, I would roll, make sure there's no blood that had gotten under their bath. Like a really good bath. And then put a lot of cold cream on their face. We don't want their face to dry out. And then it would be a day or two or however long until the viewing. And then typically the day of, like I like to wait until right at the last. They're covered with a sheet or a hospital gown until it's time to dress them. I would always ask families to bring their own clothes, and it didn't have to be a suit or their Sunday best. If that wasn't what, if you never saw Papa in anything but his coveralls, then you bring his coveralls. There's no point in putting him in something you would never recognize him in, well, we're going to go buy a suit. No, you don't. You don't. If that's not what he wore, then don't do that. I mean, I've said, do not bury me in pantyhose. Please do not make me spend eternity in pantyhose.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's good to know. Have you ever had an instance where someone's like, well, I don't have clothes? Like, what is there something you do when someone doesn't have?
We had clothes at the funeral home. Like we had gowns and things, but I've gone out and bought, like what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you want khakis and a sweater? Do you want, if they don't want to go do that themselves, I mean, I've gone and done that. And typically fully dressed, so like whatever they typically wore, like underclothing.
Underwear? Okay.
Socks. Shoes are optional. Sometimes shoes are hard to get on. But if they brought them, I always used them. Any jewelry, things like that. Of course, then the jewelry can be taken off and returned or left with, however they wanted to do that.
Because their feet swell sometimes, like
that, or, sometimes with arthritis, people's feet, shoes just weren't comfortable anyway. But warm fuzzy socks would be good. So I had the thing that always cracked me up was when families would bring, someone that was like a veteran that was retired military, and they wanted them in their dress blues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, except like that was 30 years ago.
Oh,
do not fit.
Okay.
And so and like I said, I typically never like to cut clothing unless we absolutely had to. And with that, I would always even get permission. I would constantly like, to make this fit, I'm going to need to tailor it.
Mm-hmm.
And cut the collar a little bit because he's just not the same size he was when he got out of the military.
How do you, because I'm curious if you've ever just cut the back of it and then just shape it over top of them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you do it?
And I think sometimes there's funeral homes that just do that anyway because it's easier, and they just cut and drape and tuck it in like it fits. I only did it if it just wouldn't fit. And I'd always, like I said, I would always ask, because sometimes family would say, no, I'd just rather you not, let me bring you something else. Mm-hmm. Which after you've already split, it's too late. So I would always call and get permission to do that if I had to tailor the clothes in any way.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think that was a respect thing, that it's like, he never wore his clothes that way in life. He doesn't have to spend eternity with them split down the back.
Did you ever get any humorous requests of like, he really loved this Beavis and Butthead shirt? Like, can you just put him in that or anything like that? Or
I don't remember that as much as people wanting to put things in the casket. I've put 12 packs of beer in the foot of the casket. We've put cans of vegetables. I can't even remember why we did that. There was someone that was a minister at a church that handled snakes, and they put a live snake in the casket before we closed it.
A live snake?
Yeah, I don't really know what the purpose of that was, but we had a lady this but we did it. I did it. They didn't want her to go without her dog. And so they had the dog put down so that we could put the dog in the casket. But yeah, that I was like, oh, really? Like Fluffy got to die too?
Hopefully Fluffy was old.
Yeah, well, they went together. So
goodness gracious.
So there's some different. I mean, there was.
And to clarify, they put the dog down.
Yeah, well, I didn't
brought
do that
the dog.
Part. They just brought me the dog.
Yeah. Wow. But I mean, you know, so many years. I imagine you have several stories of things. All right, so that kind of covers embalming in a light way. When did you progress into becoming the funeral director? Like, what are the positions of a funeral home? What rooms are there in the place? Like, is there places that no one is allowed? Things like that.
Yeah, like what you typically see if you were to go to, like, say, Blue Ridge, and you go and there's, you know, chapel, like a viewing room, a side room off for the family. You may see some offices, but then in the back is, of course, the embalming room. Some funeral homes have a separate dressing room just for space, really.
Mm-hmm.
Big refrigerator, because sometimes especially, you know, embalming isn't required by law. You don't have to be embalmed unless you're having a public viewing. So, of course, we had many that chose not to do that, and they would just be a graveside service with a closed casket. So, where embalming delays, you know, the body breaking down and the decomposition for persons that aren't embalmed, they went to the cooler. We also, funeral homes that I've worked at had crematorium. So, you know, before they're cremated, they would, you know, be placed in the cooler. And then once all the paperwork and everything was ready for that, we would do the cremation. There's also usually a large selection room of caskets that when you're making arrangements with a family, then you can take them back and let them actually go back and see the different caskets.
She has like sales tags on it, like for the small price of $999, you can have this premium pine, whatever.
I'm not sure you could buy a premium pine for $999, but
how much are they? I don't even know.
It was significantly more. I think when I was working, we would lower end would be about 1,000, and they go all the way up to like 25,000, like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
How many, you know, it's like anything, you can go all the way up. Now I think it's an average casket would probably be about $6,000.
Wow. That's a lot.
4 to 6, depending on the material. I mean, you know, you get wood, you can get metal.
Which they are very complex, you know, typically. I mean, it's not easy to make a casket. I get that. But at the same time, it's like, it's all going to rot. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, funeral homes have to be able to pay the light bill. They have to be able to pay their employees. So I get it. And plus, some people may rest easier knowing that, like, you know, we went all out for Uncle Fred and I miss him like crazy, but it was a very nice funeral to be with everybody. You know, I get it. But at the same time, whoa, it's like a small car almost. I mean, like one that may run.
My mom passed away recently, and I think all told, everything was right about $20,000 between the funeral home and the cemetery. And that's kind of, you know, we kind of went middle of the road, nothing too crazy extravagant, but I knew what we wanted. And, but that's one of the other things I did, was prearranged funeral sales.
Mm-hmm.
And mine, it wasn't like my sales spiel. I would get back to these families after the fact and say, do you know, you remember when we sat in that room and you and your brother hoped you were doing what Dad would have wanted? like the only way you can ever know is if you do your own yourself. And then you take that load off your kids or your spouse or whomever of saying, gosh, I hope we're doing, right by her. Well, if she made the arrangements, then that's what she wanted. And so, like I said, it wasn't some sales tactic or, and I've talked families down in the arrangement room from, well, here's a $50,000 insurance policy. Let's just spend it all. And I'm thinking, except y'all can go home and mom's left with what's left in that policy to live on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, please do not blow all your money on, is it like you have to realize that after this week is over with, there are still other expenses that are going to have to be taken care of. And so, because everybody does want to do the best for their loved one. And sometimes then that gets wrapped into, or they see that as the more money you spend, the more you love them. And I've never thought that was the case at all.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Is it cheaper to cremate than it is to?
It is. And I think we're moving very fast into a generation that does not see the value in funeral as much. And just because cremation is less expensive, they go that route. But, I still think you can do so many amazing things. You do not have to have a funeral director present to have a memorial service if the body's not there. So, like, if you have, and if an urn at that point is considered final disposition, so you can still have an urn with the ashes and go to a church or a park or wherever and have a celebration of life. And it doesn't mean just because you're cremated that you don't do anything.
Yeah.
A lot of times people say, oh, scatter my ashes, I don't care. I still believe enough in the process to say that's fine, but put a memorial down somewhere that his kids can go and visit, or it doesn't have to be in a cemetery. Like, it can be in your backyard at a bench and you have a little flower garden with, it doesn't matter. So I think as long as you're still finding ways to memorialize that person, it doesn't have to be a $20,000 funeral.
Yeah. I guess to each their own when it comes to that.
Sure.
But that's good to know. Plus, we're running out of space. I mean, I would where are we going to bury people in the future? I mean, I just feel like cemeteries are getting packed in, and we're literally
mausoleum's the way to go. You can go 6 high.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay.
Or 2 deep if you want to do.
So if I'm an entrepreneur thinking, I'm going to get in the cemetery business, mausoleum, definitely invest some money there. How much is it? I figured that would be more expensive.
It is.
Okay. Gotcha. But
you're talking space, not money.
Sure. So. No. Well, it's like the vertical,
right.
This is a terrible comparison, but hydroponic growing is vertical integration. So that's kind of the same. That's not the same thing. I'm trying here. But this is very interesting. So, all right, do you have a script that you follow when you first talk to a family, or do you have kind of a goal? Well, tell me about the positions too before I get into. Yeah.
So basically you have funeral attendants that do, like I said, work viewings, help park cars, wash cars, clean the building, do all the things. In West Virginia, you have to be licensed as both a funeral director and embalmer. In some states, you can be just a funeral director and you just meet with families and work funerals and do the arrangement part of it, and not the embalming. But in West Virginia, you have to be dually licensed. So you do both. And then if you work in a funeral home that is a funeral home cemetery combination, like Blue Ridge, you may end up taking care of cemetery families as well. Or, which for me I felt was nice, because I could do everything I wasn't handing them off to somebody else. Now you talk about the cemetery part. Well, you just talk to me about the cemetery part and do it all all the way through.
So you work with the cemetery, or did you all own the cemetery?
Okay, so here, they're corporately owned. And I will just say, because corporate funeral homes sometimes get a lot of shade about, well, they're this, or they don't care about families. For those of us that were in the trenches, we cared. We didn't, and I would, if there was a corporate policy that I felt like we needed to talk about, not break the policy, but to say like, hey, this family that is trying to bury their baby can't come up with the money for that grave. And I mean, I would go to my supervisor, and sometimes they'd have to go to their supervisor, and let's talk about how to make this work. But we also had the resources that if we had extra, like if we were busy at one particular point and we needed an extra hearse, well, let's go to our sister funeral home and get one. If we need extra staff, we'll borrow from them. We don't have this, you do. I'm going to drive to Fayetteville and get it and bring it back. And so we had extra resources because we were corporately owned. And I'm just not going to knock them.
Yeah,
I can't.
No, that's good to know. And it's like you all are borrowing a cup of sugar from your neighbors. It's like, okay,
right.
But that's good to know. It's important people know. Now, is there a quota, or is there like, all right, Sally, we got to like crank it up. We need like 2 a day.
Not on the funeral side at all. That you are not commissioned on caskets. There is no commission. Okay. So sitting in a funeral setting, the casket, what type of funeral, if you have a viewing at night versus one all the same day, it does not matter. That is not commissioned at all.
Okay.
The cemetery side works a little different. And now I will say the corporate stress of cemetery sales will hurt you because that is a sales job. We were always blessed with people that could find a way to still incorporate their sales goals in to deal. You still have to respect the fact that you are dealing with families that have lost a loved one.
Sure.
And like, I just knew I never wanted to feel like I was preying on somebody's grief to make a sale. So there's a fine line, when it comes to the cemetery part of it.
How do you price land that never goes away? Like, you pay $3,000 for this plot. In 30 years, it's still paid for. Does that make sense? Like inflation over time? Because why people buy land now is eventually it's going to gain value if you buy in the right areas.
You're not buying land. You do not own that property. You do not pay sales tax, or you don't pay property tax on that.
Okay.
You are buying the interment rights. You're buying the right to be buried there, or the right to have your loved one buried there. You do not own that property. Gotcha. And that was that when somebody came out and says, I'm going to plant a tree on that grave. No, you're not, because you don't own it. The only thing you own is the right to have a casket put in there.
Okay. So has there ever been any situations where they sell the land and then you got to figure out what to do with all the body? Like, because who's going to buy that land? I'm just curious. But it's like you buy the land and you have all these storage spaces, and eventually the storage spaces run out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So then what do you have? Well,
a lot of cemetery, now some family and church cemeteries don't fall under this, but bigger cemeteries that are considered perpetual care cemeteries, they take a portion of that money and it goes into trust to ensure that cemetery is always cared for. Doesn't matter how many generations on down, that's always going to be a cemetery. And there should be always money in trust to ensure its care and upkeep.
Cut the grass,
make sure that all's well.
Yeah. And that's, we've ran into situations where, we've tore down burial mounds to build buildings, and we've done different things like that. So I imagine, 300 years, none of us will be here, but I'm still curious, like, where's Roselawn going to be in Bluefield, I think is where that is. Or where's what's the one out here? I can't remember the real big one.
Blue Ridge.
Yeah, Blue Ridge.
Yeah.
Like, where are they going to be in 300 years?
I spent a number of years at Roselawn in Princeton, and then Monte Vista Cemetery is between Princeton and Bluefield, and they're both owned by the same group. And it is my understanding, I can't guarantee, but that if that money's trusted the way it should be, and it will always be deeded as a cemetery. You can't change. You can't be like, we'll just take the markers up and make a parking lot. Like it doesn't. It doesn't work like that.
Gotcha. Like, well, we need a new trailer park. Right. Let's put it on Rose Lawn. You can't do that.
No.
Got it. Well, that's good to know. And respectful. Everyone listening. I'm trying to be as respectful as possible with these questions, but I've just always been curious about them. So, again, going back to, like, you called family for the first time. Do you have a go-to line? Like, do you try to make them laugh, or do you try to
humor's usually not the go-to on the first call.
Makes sense.
But you can edge it in later.
Yeah.
No, usually on the first contact was, just that I'm calling from the funeral home. I want to see if they have any questions, kind of get a feel for what they have in mind. Are they looking at burial or cremation? Do they want a casket, like an open casket viewing, and give them the disclosure that embalming isn't required by law, but if they're going to have an open casket, that we do require it, as it's public safety.
Okay.
And that's then usually when you get permission, yes or no, to do the embalming. So I'd always get that first, and then set a time to come, when do you want to come in, that we can sit down and make all of the arrangements.
Is this HIPAA law?
No, HIPAA's just...
you can't tell them how someone died, though.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, that's more medical. We were governed under the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, that there was certain, like, you have to give out price lists. You can't just tally it up and hand them a bill at the end, and they're like, oh my God, what? Like, first thing, before we ever talk about anything that I'm going to sell them at any point, is you give them price lists, you tell them about the embalming, certain disclosures that we were trained, right, you have to say this, or this is where it'll come back to bite you. So, and then tell them, what they're going to need to bring when they come in. I will say, in going through my own experience with my mom more recently and being on the other side of the table, which I hated, one of the things that's kind of become a big deal is making like memorial videos and bringing in photographs that then we would put in like a video format that will play. And I remember being up till like 2:00 in the morning, going through pictures, trying to find stuff, and thinking, my God, it is ridiculous that I have been asked to do this in this short amount of time. And I thought, of all the thousands of families that I have asked that same thing, that like, you've got to bring me this, you got to do this, I need this information, I want these pictures, you have to have it here by this time, and the clothes and the jewelry. And there's just a lot of decisions that have to be made.
How the arrangements, do you say like, okay, well, you have the place from 7 to 9 or whatever, and then they kind of, do you have a, like, well, you can pick from our, basic ceremony package, or do they come at you with requests of like, well, I want a singer, I want 3 priests, or I want, all this stuff?
We could do it either. Like, I could say, but once they told me what they wanted, and I tried to tailor them to each family. I mean, we had basic packages, that you want a viewing the night before, you want everything done the one day, you want just a graveside service. And so once they kind of told me what they were looking at, I could tailor to fit what they wanted. One of the things that really became in vogue, I guess, was making every funeral unique. Not just another 2:00 funeral, that you have, okay, we're going to have a prayer and then a song and then a preacher and then another song, and every funeral be that way forever. Like, let's bring in photos. He rode motorcycles. Let's bring it in and park it right beside the casket.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You've done that? That's
yeah.
cool.
I mean, just it's things that make it more personal. I mean, we brought in, Papa's lazy boy and sat it, with, his favorite magazine on it, and just things that, like, that's who that person was.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, like, a body laying in a casket, and depending on how you believe, they're not there anymore. Again, that's just your opportunity to give, to have closure and say your goodbyes. But the things about that person, their hobbies and their loves and their, pictures of them throughout their life, that's more the spirit of who somebody is. And so we really tried to bring that part into it, that it just wasn't so cold and uniform.
I feel the same way. Like, I know I've been to a few funerals, and there's a regular occurrence of people telling jokes and talking about this person. And I, for one, think, how beautiful is that we get to remember them and we get to kind of laugh with them one last time, or, however you believe. I just think stuff like that is really beautiful when it comes to services. All right. So do you kind of control, like, say they have graveside and then they have the funeral? Are you like, all right, Terry, Harry, y'all go to the cemetery, get the tent set up? Floyd, you'll go out front, park cars.
There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that goes on. Like, I need to find a hairdresser, a musician. I need to call this preacher. I need to order their flowers. There's a whole list of making sure all the things get done. And my thing was, for that 3, 4, 5 days, however, that family had my cell phone number, and I was on call 24/7, that if they thought of something that they wanted to add at the last minute or something, just, I forgot to ask you this question. I was there I was locked in until it was done.
Did you ever have a protocol for, like, because sometimes there's emotions flying at funerals. Did anyone ever, like, get a little rowdy or?
Oh, I've had funerals with the police have had to come, and the granddaughters were fighting over somebody's ring, and there was a fist fight behind the hearse. And I had a family I met with. Actually, it was one gentleman, and he kept looking at his watch, and I thought, he might have to meet with the minister or whatever. And he's like, how long is this going to take? Because my brothers are cleaning out mom's house as we speak. And I'm thinking, wow. So you see a lot of stuff that goes on, just family dynamics. I will tell you, death does not bring out the best in families. Not all of them. Now, some it will, and everybody bands together, and that's the time to put all your petty stuff aside and come together. And some families, wow, I've seen some wicked, fighting over, everybody's upset. They haven't slept for days in a lot of cases. So emotions are just up in the rafters. And at the end of it all, I'm going to ask them for a large sum of money. So I've been called a lot of things,
Sure.
Just because that anger is going somewhere. And sometimes the person at the head of the table is an easy target.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Jerry comes in Zanny barred out of his mind and falls over the casket, and there you are. But I would imagine, it's so both worlds of, like, oh, this could be beautiful, but it also could not improve your faith in humanity. Like, it's like, oh, okay, so, this person was here for 98 years, and now all of the grandchildren are fighting and can't get along and are fighting over the insurance policy or, whatever. Or
you thought that there was money to bury them, and turns out the granddaughter that had been staying and taking care of them had wiped out the checking account, and there's no money left. Or, there was just these crazy things that would happen. But also, there were so many amazing things. Like, there are definitely things that would make you question your faith in humanity. But there were so many things that I saw that really strengthened my faith. And, when I saw people able to handle horrible situations with grace. When I was at Roselawn, we took care of several of the miners killed in Upper Big Branch.
Oh, wow.
And just horrible. And those families, the strength that some of those families shown as they walked through that process. I mean, like I have children now, just thinking about it. And we just did, I did amazing things. We had a gentleman, he was a POW in World War II. And they recovered his remains, sent them to Hawaii to be DNA tested, or whatever. And
it's called like repatriation or something like that. Yeah,
I had never been a part of that, and it was unbelievable. So the only family that was left was like a great niece, and so she's like, "Well, they're going to send his remains," and it was unbelievable. So they did a full military funeral. It was a few bones. But a full uniform with all the medals and everything in the casket. And they had active military there. They had contacted like the local VFWs. And then there were like several veteran biker groups that came when they rolled. Because I thought, like, there's really no family left. Like, who's going to be here? That was unbelievable. I mean, the military showed up. You had all these like veteran bikers coming with flags flying. You had like 3 different VFWs there. They did taps for this gentleman that had been gone for all these years. And he was finally getting the burial that he deserved. And it was, I mean, it really, like, there's times that you knew that you were part of something special. And like, for me, that was one of them.
That's beautiful.
It was just a really neat experience for everybody that was there, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The UBB families, too, you mentioned. I mean, I did a project for, I think it was about 4 years, maybe 5 years, audio project about it. And yeah, all the families were just incredible, strong people. So yeah. All right. I am curious, backing up to the embalming process, is there any cases that stick out to you respectfully of your hardest achievements or anything in particular that you could talk about when it comes to that comes to your mind? When
I was in mortuary school, and this is another thing that kind of stood out to me about the importance of being able to give families closure. One of the cases when I was in school was a 12-year-old girl that her brother, who was, I believe, was younger, he was maybe 9 or 10. I guess they were latchkey kids. Mom was at work, and there were a group of boys in the yard taunting the little boy. So he went in the house and got, I want to say, a 22. And he's on the porch, and he's threatening him. Well, the sister comes out, and she's trying to de-escalate. And she takes the barrel of the gun to try to get away from him. So when she pulls the gun toward her, it pulls on his trigger finger.
Oh, man.
And he shot her right between the eyes. And the medical examiner had told the mom that the girl wasn't viewable, that her head had been blown off. And and they had taken the son like into custody and were trying to figure the whole situation out. And I thought, here's this mom whose world has just been upended. And now they're telling her she can't even see her kid to tell her goodbye. And we got this girl, and she was very bloody, but she just had a real small hole. And it was like a small caliber, so like a 22. It didn't exit, but it oscillated in there and broke all the bones in her skull. And so I had a brilliant instructor. He said, we're going to fix that. And we took a Black & Decker drill, and we drilled holes in the pieces of the skull, and we wired them back together.
Wow.
Like puzzle pieces. And once then because I told you when they do an autopsy, you're kind of cut from in the back from ear to ear. But we recreated her skull. We cleaned her up, put just, I mean, it like a touch of wax to fill that hole. She was beautiful.
Oh.
And we gave that mom the chance to say goodbye to her daughter.
Wow.
And that one stuck with me, that like that is the importance of doing, because it would be easy to say, yeah, you're right. That's going to be a lot of work. And so restorative work at that point then became my passion. And so we had, I mean, several instances that a lot of funeral directors may have said, that is going to take hours upon hours of restorative work. And I'm always like, get me some extra strong coffee. I'll stay up. Like, I don't care how long it takes. Like, I always wanted to try to do that.
Mm-hmm. What's it like for you going through that? Is there a PTSD thing or anything? Like, do you ever, I imagine
probably. I drank a lot during that period of time, but there's some things, and there's some things that are just horribly sad, and just horrible in general. Bodies that have been traumatized by accidents or homicides. You kind of have to be a little detached from that.
Mm-hmm.
I always said, if I get to the point that I'm completely cold to it, I need to quit, because then I'm like, I don't ever want to get there. But you do have to be a little detached. Because I was like, you think you have to be able to think out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that's a little unemotional. Like, we had a gentleman, at one point, his neighbors had broken in to steal drugs and beat him to death with the claw end of the hammer.
Mm.
And so he just had huge places just gone. His skull was crushed. And I took a wig mannequin, like the foam, and formed his face back over that, and then was able to like close the holes and stuff. We had a viewing for that guy. Like,
wow.
Yeah. That things that, I would just always felt like I don't want to be lazy and say, yeah, that's going to take way too long, or things like that. But I did always believe in the power of the process of giving families the closure and the opportunity to.
Yeah. Wow. That's, cause it's the last image of them before you'll never see them again in person. It's all photos and
again, especially when it's like a trauma, kind of like I was saying, my mom said, if I don't see him in that casket, I will never believe that this is real. And so, especially when you have, sudden things and accidents or traumatic things, that I think that's a lot of people's mindset is like, I have to see, I have to have that closure. I have to see that person is in fact laying in that casket, or I'm just not going to be able to accept the fact that this has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. There was a guy, I was going to do a story, and I still may do this one day, but, and I'll say his name because I know his mom wouldn't care. I talked to her for a long time, but his name's Clay Epperly, and he got sealed up in a coal mine because he was in there stealing copper with some of his friends, and then he got disoriented. He wandered off into the mine, and rescue teams came, couldn't find him anywhere. And ultimately, it was too dangerous, and they sealed the mine up. And the mom has never gotten over not being able to see him. And kind of, obviously something like that changes your life and often ruins your life. And so I can see how that's so important and understand that. But how... It's a lot of pressure. Did you ever feel pressure, or was it more of a challenge? I think you kind of got to be like, you know what? I'm going to get this.
Right.
And
I was that way about it a great deal, that I'm like, oh no. Because like I said, if somebody said, we're just going to close the casket, I'm like, oh, you just wait,
Sure.
And sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. But it was a challenge. But then also, it was hard. I know there's there was one younger guy that was killed in a car accident. Actually, he was in a car accident and he didn't die for several days after. Had a lot of head trauma, which in those couple days bruised and was swollen, and because he wasn't killed instantly, had very disfiguring trauma and dark bruises, which you have to cover with makeup. And so he kind of looked made up. Man, I was so proud. Like, I had taken like hair off the back and like made him an eyebrow. And like, I had spent so many hours, and his sister walked in and said, "Oh my God, he looks fake," and took a tissue and wiped. And there went half his face. Right before the viewing was supposed to start. And I'm thinking, I cannot believe that just happened, because that took hours. But and she was just upset. And
Sure.
and it did, it did look like makeup, because it was trying to cover all that trauma. So there was a lot of things that, like that. That was a lot of pressure, trying to figure out how I was going to fix that real quick.
Where do you go from there? Does she like leave the room?
I think at that point she realized she had made a grave mistake, because he looked way worse then than he did when she walked in.
Oh.
So, and families, like I said, you're dealing with people that are so emotional. And I just never, like I said, I've been called a lot of things, especially at the end when you ask for money. But I never really I just knew to not take that personal. That like I'm an easy target, but just be mad at me, and it's okay.
This may sound like an insensitive question, but what do you do when someone doesn't pay?
That is one of the reasons that you get your money up front. There, a gentleman that I actually knew from the golf course. It was a funeral director in Beckley forever, Mr. Ritchie and Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'd heard him say, money and tears dry up at the same rate. Like, everybody wants the best funeral. And then after it's all over with, man, that's a big bill to have to pay. And you can't really, although I think there was a guy back in the 70s that like took an old vault. It hadn't been used, but it was old and dirty, I think, from a disinterment. Didn't have anybody in it. And he rolled up to somebody's house in a vault truck and said, "You either pay or you tell me where you want it."
Wow, it's like Repo Joe stuff.
I know. And I don't think you could get away with that anymore.
Right.
But so that's kind of where a lot of funeral homes have gone to. They'll take an insurance assignment so that the insurance company sends the money directly to them, or cash, check, or credit card.
100% up front? Okay, that's about the only way you could do it.
Because after the fact, you
do put the coffin in the driveway, yeah,
it's hard to collect after the fact.
Sure,
so
that makes
and
sense.
that and we always use the analogy, and I kind of hate it's like, well, you wouldn't walk into Walmart and walk out with a buggy full of groceries and then just tell them to send you a bill.
Sure.
Kind of not exactly the same thing, especially when you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars potentially. It is a hardship. I won't for 1 minute say that, if you don't have life insurance or you don't have pre-arrangements made to cover your funeral arrangements or your cemetery arrangements, that is a huge expense.
Oh, yeah. Well, but it's also a business, and if it didn't exist, what would people do? They go like they used to, go out in the holler, dig a hole.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's a balance there of like, and I'm sure a majority of people understand that, and they know, but I'm sure it pops up as like, whoa, 20 grand, that's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money.
It kind of sneaks up on them.
And I think that's one of the reasons we're moving so quickly to cremation in a lot of sense. When I first started, I think the cremation rate in West Virginia, and I'm not going to try to quote exact numbers, but it was low. It was like 11% and was trending upward. And about 10 years ago was maybe 20 to 25. somebody told me a statistic recently. It's close to 60.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in the heart of the Bible Belt. We're behind. So like Florida, California, places that have been doing 60 and 70% cremations for years are edging up even higher.
Okay. That makes sense. We do have medical marijuana now, but hey, take that for what it's worth. But anyway, so I like to ask people when they talk about their professions and former professions in depth, what's the Yelp review? Should someone do this? Did you enjoy it? Is it good money? Overall.
I've always said it was like doctor's hours without doctor's pay. But it did afford me a good living. Toward the end, when I was doing both funeral directing and sales, sales is kind of where the money's at. It's also where the pressure's at. I wouldn't recommend that so much, but the funeral part of it, the funeral directing, the embalming, I miss the embalming more than any of it. Like, throw me in some scrubs and stick me back there with a radio and and I'm good for all day.
So that's the process. You just have an open radio, like playing what kind of music? What are we talking? Dolly Parton, or are we talking Guns N' Roses?
I used to be right when I started, it was radio and it was 103.7, but now I guess we move into our own personal playlist. You could just play whatever. So, and then mine's a wide array, usually of classic rock and some alternatives. So
perfect.
Like sometimes you can just like rage embalm to some heavy metal, and
I can see that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Name a band, favorite metal band.
Oh,
I'm curious.
Metallica.
Oh,
always.
It's a go-to. Master Puppets.
Yeah.
The album.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm sad I didn't see him at Virginia Tech recently.
Oh, I heard it was amazing.
I actually was sad about that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I heard it. Well, watching the videos, I just get chills every time I hear them. I just love them. I digress. All right, so you can make a good living if you can withstand the stress. You mentioned, is drinking typically a thing amongst the industry, or is it? We don't
ones that like if they ranked occupations, that funeral directors ranked up there a bit. As you're dealing with a lot of heavy stuff. So we always at like funeral director and cemetery conventions, stuff like that, we always had a good time. So I don't know if that still holds true statistically or whatever, but you work hard and you play hard. I think it makes you appreciate how fragile life can be, and you don't take that for granted.
Yeah.
That was a big takeaway for me was, there was just so many instances of, I was with him yesterday and it was fine, or they left for work this morning and they didn't come home, and when you're just immersed in that so much, you really understand the meaning of like, go home and hug your kids a little tighter tonight. And,
perspective.
So many times that I'm having a bad day because something stupid. Who knows? Somebody cut me off in traffic, or crazy people at McDonald's didn't put my whole order in there on the way to work. And then you get there and you're like, well, these are the calls we got overnight. And all of a sudden my problems seemed so petty compared to the families that I would be dealing with all day.
Yeah.
So it really sometimes was an amazing perspective check.
Yeah. That's good to know. All right, golf. So eventually you transitioned.
Switch gears.
Yeah. Oh, man. I appreciate
you. Didn't even know this one was coming, did you?
I appreciate you sharing that. The feeling I got when you told me that daughter story, oh my goodness. That is just so sad. And kudos to you for being able to, I mean, you're almost the human embodiment of almost an angel for that mom. You know what I mean? I mean, in my opinion, and what a personality you have. I wouldn't have guessed this position in 50 tries if I didn't know you now, that's what you did. And I think it's so unique, and I appreciate you doing that. But eventually, so your dad owns Grandview Country Club.
Yes.
All right. And shout out, I've been there several times. One of the most beautiful golf courses in West Virginia and probably Appalachia. I mean, it's always top notch. I'm always like, how do they cut all this freaking grass? Everything is just so well manicured. But when you started that, how did you start getting into that? Was you like, hey, Dad, I'm gonna kind of...
Well, I had decided at that point to leave the funeral industry, and that was a hard, because I would I've always been the funeral director and all that. Like, that was my identity, was kind of wrapped up in that. And so it was a interesting transition, but I'm like, you know what? That I did for 20 years. I did the high stress, you're on call 24/7. You really are. Because if somebody passes away in the middle of the night, you get to get up and deal with that. I mean, there were times I put my kids in the back seat of a hearse, and like, we'd roll up to somebody's house, and family didn't know that like my 3-year-old was sleeping in the car outside, and we're getting ready to blow out the candles on the birthday cake, and the phone rings, and you have to take that call. And so it was just this, you're just always on call to deal with whatever. Mm-hmm. It could be a complaint that somebody's taken the flowers off my grave at the cemetery, or it's, okay, I have to leave right now and go to this person's home. And so there was just, it just came a time with where I was with my kids being small that needed to do something different. And
9 to 5.
So my family, I still wouldn't call it 9 to 5, but it's more at my leisure.
Right.
But no, I'm lucky enough. I work with my dad and my brother, and my daughter is usually out. She's 14. She's usually out running some kind of piece of equipment that my dad's talked her into doing. But it's a much less high stress. Like, you're talking about perspective, people will come in and say, oh my gosh, the greens are rolling slower today. And I'm thinking, compared to, like some of the problems I dealt with in a past life, that really seems insignificant.
Sure.
It's grass, buddy.
Let me tell you this story. You want to sit down, old man? Yeah. Let me tell you some things. But yeah, I can imagine the contrast there.
Yeah, so I'm like, I'm just not really feeling too sorry for you right now. That you're still out in the sunshine, drinking your beer and swinging your clubs. Just putt harder. I don't know. So
that's great. Wow. Okay. And do y'all have like a grass cutting schedule? Like, okay, we'll do rough on Wednesdays.
Oh gosh, my husband Doug, he cuts rough, and he was a state employee for 35 years. He was director of toll. Just everything by the book. Well, let me tell you, there is no book at Grandview. It is all in Randy's head, or, it's so weather dependent, because typically he cuts rough on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And right now he is sitting at home trying to figure out when he's going to get it done, because it's a monsoon outside at Grandview. And he can't mow grass today. So now how do you switch around all the other things to make it work? And so it's been a big change for him. But the weather, it kind of sets a lot of our schedule.
Yeah. And the greens, you have a certain machine for that? Like, how do you get that smoothness?
They are cut every morning. We have a lovely guy that comes and cuts every single morning. And I thought, God, don't ever give me that job. Because sometimes when I mow, I'm like, if I cut it super close and it dies, then I won't have to mow it again quite so soon. That's not, I get fussed at when I do that. But I'm like, if I had to cut the same 18 holes or 20 greens, I guess, with the putting green and all that, every morning, like I would just be angry.
Yeah.
But no, so they cut. We have a great group of guys that come, and some cut teas and some cut just different. They all have their little different things, and
that's awesome. Who cuts the pins? Who places the pins? That's a big deal.
Okay, so small world. Chris Davis, who you know.
What?
It's his brother, John.
No way.
Yes. So shout out to John Davis for setting the cups, unless he sets them in a really bad place, and then y'all can just be mad at him.
We just Kevin Baconed Natalie Cochran.
I know.
Wow. That is a small world. And the number, last thing on the course, and then we'll wrap this up, but there's one of the most beautiful par threes you will ever play, and I believe it's number 15. Number 15. Highly suggest.
Thanks.
Yeah. And don't even bother asking for a membership, correct? No.
That's correct.
No membership. Okay. I don't blame you. Well, it's hard to, so I imagine, something that's been this special, because it's been in your all's family for, how long has the course been open?
This is, I think, our 53rd season.
53 years. And you mentioned before, it was all farmland?
My family had the property. It was a commercial vegetable farm when my great-grandparents had it. Then my granddad started a dairy. It was a dairy farm. And then in about the early 70s, I think he realized, because he was like the milkman with the milk bottles coming to your house, and he was starting to see where like chain grocery stores and like dairy was going a different direction. And so he called my dad, who was at Marshall, and he's like, I'm going to need you to come home, and we're going to have to do something else with this property, or we're just going to have to sell it piece by piece and lose it. So neither of them had ever played golf ever. And somebody suggested, Goose Andrews suggested that you should make a golf course. And they had no clue. And they all sat down and they sketched out and designed the holes.
By not knowing golf, they designed the holes.
Yeah. So, right. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's amazing.
So, like 15, my granddad, for 30 straight days, daylight till dark, all he did with a loader was move dirt to build up to that green and do. So there's some great stories about, how these two farmers, vegetable and dairy farmers, and they've figured out a way to make a golf course and make it work, and they run it like a farm. So
that's beautiful. What an Appalachian story that is. Do you know how much it cost to build that course?
You couldn't do it.
Millions.
Because part of the property, we had a sand quarry, so they made their own topsoil.
Oh wow!
And then part of what we have still is farm, and so it was a great place to grow up. And then, everybody kept saying, like when I was growing up, are you going to grow up and take it over? And I'm like, I just really don't want to do that. And my dad was great, and he never for 1 second expected me to or pressured me to if that wasn't my passion, and very supportive of my funeral career, and now has let me come back into the fold and only fusses mildly when I break stuff or.
You play golf?
I do.
Okay. What's your handicap?
I'm not sure about, I played a lot when I grew up playing, and then I completely gave it up. And that's how I met my husband. I was actually working, and he was golfing and saw me, and he's like, we got to get you back to playing. And now he regrets it because I played a lot. I learned to play a long time ago. And
does your dad charge you?
No.
Okay. Thank goodness. Good job, Dad.
That's what I told my husband. I said, for Father's Day, I'm going to get you around to golf. So we went and golfed. Probably about 12 or 13, maybe.
Oh, that's awesome. Mine's 9.3 right now.
Oh, well.
My gin. We need to play sometime. That'd be fun.
Come on out.
Yeah.
I'll get you a tea time.
Yeah.
Maybe can't get you membership, but
That's
I'll get
fine.
you a tea time.
Well, if you take it over one day and you want to open up memberships,
we try, since we're a public course, we've tried doing more memberships.
It's tough.
And you're so locked up with members.
Yep.
Everybody else is mad because they can't get on.
And it's just, it's family run operation essentially, but you also have other people, but that's a lot. I get it. And then with the more people don't think about. The more people you have, the more feet that's hitting ground, the more stuff you got to do to the place, and you got to keep it going. But it's yeah, I mean, pristine. I don't know. I mean, you know, Glade is nice, Cobb's nice, but even you know, they got Woodhaven out at Glade, and it gets in bad shape sometimes. And it's like, how your all's is just so lush. The rough is just such a saturated green. I hope this gets y'all some business, because I love it. And you have a driving range.
We do have a driving range. The only, you know, that's the thing, is we've just kind of outlasted a lot of other courses that have, you know,
yeah, they used to have what, Little Beaver,
Beaver Creek,
yeah.
What was the one?
Briar Patch. Yeah.
And so and we try to keep it affordable. I mean, it's, you know.
No, it's
$38 during the week. You can't beat it.
Oh, it's perfect.
Thank you.
Well, cool. Sally, it was nice talking death with you. I appreciate you. I mean, I think we were respectful and answered all my questions. And I think we answered a lot of viewers' questions, but yeah, y'all go to Grandview Golf Course. And everyone else, before you leave, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Creepalachia on YouTube if you haven't. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, take a minute and leave a review. That'll really help the show be found. And we do have merch now. It's on creepalachia.shop. And check us out on Facebook and TikTok. And above all else, everyone else, always remember, long live Appalachia.